What is up, everybody? Welcome to episode 24 of Destination the Show. As always, I'm JD Cameron here with Jeremy Nygaard. Jeremy, what's up, man? How are you?
I'm great. Just enjoying the winter weather outside from
Boo.
inside because I hate snow and everything that comes with the winter. So I got all the drapes pulled and I'm ready to do this.
I
How
feel
are
like
you?
there's no complaining though, right?
Oh
About the winter that we've had to date.
no, I'm not complaining about it at all. I just look outside and I see the white stuff and I'm like, God, why couldn't it just avoided us forever? I was ready for opening day, when it's 45 degrees.
Yes.
Let's do this, not have to wait 2 months. How are you doing on this wonderful Wednesday evening?
I'm doing so well. I can't believe that we are spending Valentine's Day together. I can think of few people with whom I would rather be enjoying this fine evening. All right. A couple, we're going to switch some things up here real quick today. A couple of housekeeping notes right off the top, ways that you can support the show. So, we now have a fully established YouTube page. You can find that and subscribe at Destination the Show on YouTube. You can follow us on Twitter at DTS_pod1. You can find the show wherever you get your podcasts. Anything you can do to help is warmly appreciated. Downloading episodes, liking them, subscribing, leaving us a positive review, or interacting with our content in any way you choose. Um, some other housekeeping, Jeremy, before we start, we ran a little competition in the week to give away some of Tom Froming's brand new prospect fanzine. Did you get a copy yet?
I've not. I did look at some of his stuff on the Twitter, and it's good. Like it kind of follows the old prospect handbook format,
Yeah,
simplified. But Tom does good work, and so it's kind of a departure from his video stuff. But just reading some of it, it's like, yep, this is good stuff. It's a good. It's going to be a great resource for people to have to pull out. And I'm looking forward to what else he's got in the mix. Ready to do during the season.
for sure. It is cool, man. Very grassrootsy. Enjoy seeing people posting pictures of those as they're starting to arrive. Tom kindly allowed us to give away a couple on the show. So, fanzine winners, YouTube handle at MN Twin Pinions. MN Twin Opinions? And MN Twin Pinions? You know the one. You have won. Congrats. And Ben and Gelkin. If I mispronounce your last name, I'm sorry. I'm having a hard time talking today, apparently. But we are going to shoot you guys a DM probably tomorrow. Just need your address. Congrats. Enjoy. I do not think you will be disappointed. The other thing, Jeremy, that I wanted to talk to you about before we talk baseball is about Scandinavia, Norway specifically.
That's right. So at some point in time, when I signed up for our podcast host, I started getting these emails from a website like, here's how you can improve your podcast. Here's how you can do this, and then it was like,
We need all the
okay,
help we can get.
well, I would just click on it, and it wasn't really much there unless you paid a bunch of money, but it would show us some rankings of our podcast. So there was
Yep.
some U.S. rankings that I would find funny, screenshots, send them to you. But where we've really got a foothold is in Norway. We peaked as the 11th highest rated baseball podcast in the whole country of Norway, and that's relatively amazing, right?
So that is very amazing. Um, I need to like. What I'm really most curious to understand is like no one has listened to that many baseball podcasts in Norway. I would assume, right? Norway is what, like, a alpine sports soccer country. Um, that's my guess. So like, I need to know, does number 11, like, number 11 baseball podcast has to be like more than one person listening. I need to know like what that number is. Like, what's the range do you think that puts us at the 11th spot? Theo says 10.
I don't have any guess. I don't even know. I could pay, I could subscribe, and I could, you know, invest and
Oh
maybe
no.
find this out. And maybe not. I don't know. That's the thing. But I get it. We were 11. We peaked at 11. Then we dropped down to 13. I think currently we're sitting in the low teens. So there's some ebb and some flow in Norway.
So
Maybe it's my long lost relatives. That's where they're from. Um, I don't know. I think Theo maybe has some there too.
I feel like it's like some kind of technical glitch that's like rerouting traffic from northern Minnesota to Norway. Here's what I'm going to say. If you are living in Norway or any country outside of the United States, I'm really curious to know where you listen from. Send us an email, destinationtheshow@gmail.com. Let us know where you're listening to the show from, because that's really cool. We also for the first time, I think, got into the top 100 baseball podcasts in the U.S. So that was exciting. I appreciate everyone who supported the show. Got a lot of work to do. um, Dude, college baseball starts this week, Friday.
Yeah, you're gonna watch all of it, and then
All
you're
of
gonna
it.
tell me about it, and then it's gonna be perfect. I have
It's
to
gonna be
balance
great.
the baseball watching with the high school basketball watching and the officiating and the live streaming and all the things I like to do. But um, it's exciting because this is where things start to happen, and the timeline
Yes,
starts to fill up, and the talking about the players and the rising and the falling and the Paul Skeenses of the world go crazy, and the Chase Dolanders start to come back to the pack, and this is where things start to move. This is when the consensus big board starts to get written on and
that's right.
reprinted.
This is right. This is when actual prospecting and player write ups start. So I'm excited, man. I feel like this is what we've been waiting for. College baseball, pro like spring training, pitches and catches reported, spring games on the horizon. We have arrived at baseball season, man. So, with that in mind, we figured today we would do a little bit of a recap of the off season for all three of these teams that we talk about, right? The Brewers, the Cubs, and the Twins. Obviously, we could do an episode each on these, but we wanted to compress this into one because we got a bunch of other stuff we want to do in future weeks. So here's how it's going to go. It's going to be kind of like a lightning quick recap, and we're going to try and center it around a couple of key questions for each team. So we'll do a quick recap of like the major incomings and the major outgoings. And then I'm going to set you up, Jeremy, with like a question or a couple of questions that there are definitely some in here I know that we're going to disagree on. I'm excited to get into it with you. Um, so let's dig in. We'll start with the Brewers. Off-season recap. I wrote Jackson Churio extension as an in, even though it's not technically an in because it still feels like a hugely important move. In Joey Ortiz, DL Hall, Reese Hoskins, Jacob Junis, Joe Ross, Wade Miley out. Longtime manager Craig Counsell, Corbin Burns, Brandon Woodruff, Adrian Hauser. Um, First thing I want to do, Jeremy, is I want to get your take on the Corbin Burns trade because we were in the midst of a run of awesome guest appearances. We have Pearson. Oh, we have Ben Badler from Baseball America. Great episodes. And we did not get really a chance to break this down in depth. So, Corbin Burns trade. The Brewers sent Corbin Burns 1 year of Corbin Burns to the Orioles for left-handed pitcher DL Hall and shortstop prospect Joey Ortiz. Curious about your thoughts about this, man, because I kind of feel like we think differently about this trade. You do
Yeah.
not
So,
like it, right?
well, yeah. I mean, at the time, it seemed really underwhelming,
Mm,
and not necessarily. I mean, from a value perspective, it was like you're trading one of the top pitchers in the league to a team that's got this stacked system,
mm-hmm,
and you're getting DL Hall and Joey Ortiz. Or Hall's not even really considered a prospect anymore. He spent some time in the Orioles bullpen, and I was high on Hall. I'm actually we talked pre show about some fantasy baseball stuff. I actually picked Hall up in a couple of leagues that I was in because I'm like, this guy has a chance to be
mm-hmm,
something, and I think he still does. Ortiz obviously has value. I think he showed up on some top 100s or maybe just off the top 100s. But I feel like there had to have been a better haul that they could have gotten than these two guys. Now, they shopped him all winter, right? This isn't like a new deal where it was like they just decided on this singular day, we got
Mhm.
to do the best we can and move Corbin Burns today. So I think they were able to, ultimately secure two guys that they really liked. Um, Maybe more so than we liked, or that the Orioles liked, or that other rival teams liked. And at the end of the day, they traded 1 year of Corbin Burns for 12 years of service on two relatively highly regarded prospects. So
Mhm.
um, I guess from that perspective, it's something. Um, in return, though, the Orioles got a number one pitcher on what was the best baseball team over the course of or the best team in the American League over the course of the season.
Mhm.
And whether if they don't sign Burns to an extension, they're
They
getting
won't.
draft pick compensation,
Sure.
right? And so if you think about that, the Brewers gave up the opportunity to get a first round pick for 6 years of guys that are closer to the majors, but that makes that deal look even better for the Orioles, right? They get Burns for a year for two prospects that weren't really going to help this year's team, and then they're going to turn around and get draft pick compensation. So, yeah, I like the deal better for the Orioles. The Brewers obviously liked what they got, but for me, it was underwhelming.
So I want to just like throw in there that the Brewers did, and this is my bad because I didn't put it in the running order, but the Brewers also got a pick in this
Right.
trade, right? So that part does come out in the wash. Although I hear what you're saying, for me, like I agree with some of what you said. Although to me, you just kind of argued your way into saying that DL Hall and Joey Ortiz is a pretty good return for Corbin Burns, but like it's a little bit of a misappropriation of what kind of value you're looking at for 1 year of a starting pitcher, no matter what that starting pitcher is. And Corbin Burns has talked about his desire to test free agency, right? He's going to do that. He's going to get paid. The Orioles are not going to pay him. Maybe they will under new ownership. Let's maybe push that to the side for a second. I also think there's a few points to be made for both the prospects that I just want to touch on quickly. So Hall, right? Lefty, good velocity, elite fastball, average close to 96 miles an hour, massive extension, which adds more to that fastball. His like stuff plus on the fastball is like 120, 121 ish. That's top 40 in baseball. Um, Needs to locate it and command it at the top of the zone more. Sliders plus. He changed it halfway through last year. And if anyone's looking for reading on this, Spencer Michaelis, who we had on the show, put up a great piece at Brewer Fanatic about what the Brewers are getting in Hall. But essentially, he changed his slider midseason, added like 9 inches of drop to it, and um, kept the same horizontal movement, good changeup, good curve. So like potentially 4+ pitches and great velo from a left-handed pitcher. Obviously, the issue is walks, but if he can't rein it in, you still have an elite bullpen arm. And if there's one thing that I trust the Brewers to do is making tweaks to a pitcher or the final like stages of development of getting an arm MLB ready. So I just think like Hall didn't get enough run for people to be as unexcited as they were about him as part of the return.
Right, but I mean, the way I look at it is, could the Brewers have got more at the deadline? And I feel like the chances maybe.
Your dog is gonna be making guest appearances today, huh? We're all about it. That's okay. We like guests on the show. Maybe. But yeah, again, like Ortiz is another guy I think who is a little bit underrated. Like there's a ton to like about his profile, great bat to ball skills. Like he's going to accrue value no matter what cuz he's an elite defender. Top 40 average exit velocity at AAA last year. Needs to rein in the chase rate, right? So both of them have stuff to work on of course, but at worst you have a solid value accruing major league infielder, right? Who could be plenty more if his hit tool continues to develop. And at worst, on the pitching side, you have an elite back of the bullpen, high leverage arm for 1 year of Burns, and I think there's a decent chance that the Brewers can squeeze more out of one or both of those guys.
Right. And I think right now the Brewers have a lot of depth at like the third base in their organization, but
For sure.
not necessarily what Ortiz is doing great at. And Terang was underwhelming too. So it gives options, obviously. And uh, I don't know that I'll ever not feel like, man, they maybe could have squeezed more out of a contending team at the deadline. And we'll never know that, I guess, unless the Orioles really fall on their face and move Burns at the deadline, right?
For sure. For sure, we will never know, and we will agree to disagree. I think it sounds like the Brewers are getting Hall ready as a starter this spring, so very intrigued to see how their opening day rotation starts. Anything else on the Brewers, Jeremy, before we move on onto the Cubs and Twins?
I do think that the loss of Craig Counsell will be a really big deal. And I've said it before. I don't think Brewers fans appreciated how good of a manager he
Yeah.
was and how creative he was and what he did with maybe less than other people had. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I think it's going to become evident this year when he's doing it for a team that has more willingness to spend. But also the lights are brighter in Chicago than they were in Milwaukee, so the pressure will be more on Counsell too as he looks to bring the Cubs back to the promised land.
Yeah, for sure. What's your elevator pitch thoughts on what the Brewers managed to accomplish this offseason if there's no more moves left? I'm really curious for that.
It's weird because they made like moves for the future, right? And
Mhm.
and signing Chrio to huge money. They made moves like with Hoskins that is like a win now type moves, even though Hoskins isn't completely healthy.
Mhm.
But they also made a lot of like kick the can down the road moves, which don't add up to me. Right?
Mhm.
It's like if you're gonna go for it, if you were gonna sign Hoskins, if you were gonna bring in Wade Miley, if you were gonna get some of these older guys, um, then why wouldn't you just keep Burns and go for it? And if
Yep.
you weren't going to keep Burns, the Shrio contract is always going to make sense. But the Hoskins deal is a, a little less, unless they felt like they got great value on that, right?
Mhm.
Uh, so I don't see them being as competitive as they have been. I mean, they've always been a really good team under Counsell, and maybe I'm undervaluing what they still have. But you lose Woodruff, you lose Burns. Uh, they've lived on that rotation. I don't think their bullpen's great. I was just looking at the guys in their bullpen and they don't stick out to me. They seem a little bit older, and their rotation lacks depth too. So I'm not going to pretend to know everything about the Brewers. Obviously, I have a lot of friends who are Brewers fans, and there hasn't really been a lot of chatter about the prospects of the Brewers, uh, in 2024.
Yeah. I think so. On this is something that kind of feels like it rings true. Final word on the Brewers before we move on to the Cubs. The Pacoda standings came out a BP in the last week, right? And the Brewers in I think in all of baseball, certainly in the NL Central, kind of had the widest range of possible simulated outcomes from kind of how their roster is currently constructed, and that feels really really true. It feels like a little bit of a setup here for 2025 to me, right? Churio, maybe he struggles a little bit out the gate. Maybe DL Hall takes a little while to figure it out as a starting pitcher. Um, Almost like a competitive rebuild, which is something that Vikings fans will if you're like me, hate to hear that phrase, but I am really intrigued. I think the Brewers win total has to be one of the widest in Major League Baseball in 2024. That's why they play the games. It'll be interesting. Um, all right, let's move on to the Cubs, man. Off-season recap in new manager Craig Counsell. Had to put that front and center. That's gonna be drama, right? In left-handed pitcher Shota Imanaga, relief pitcher Hector Neris, Michael Bush and Yency Almonte, part of the big trade with the Dodgers, which we'll touch on in a second. Out. Cody Bellinger? Question mark. Marcus Stroman, Heimer Candelario. I know we walked through this one a little bit at the time, so we don't need to spend a ton of time on this one now. But just curious for your thoughts now that we're like a month out on the Michael Bush for Jackson Ferris trade that the Cubs and Dodgers executed.
Yeah, and I like that deal at the time for both sides, and I still do. But I'm really a bigger fan of the prospects the Dodgers got, and I think long term it's going to be a better deal for the Dodgers. Um, I think the Jackson Ferris return for the Dodgers is going to look like the best player in the deal. And I don't think that's a surprise to anybody that's listened to us from the beginning because I was a big Ferris guy for the Cubs. And I think Zaire Hope has this really high ceiling that it might turn out to be, super athletic, Joe Benson type of not baseball player, right? But I think there's also a chance that he can turn into a top of the order center field long-term prospect, and the Dodgers develop their players really well. Michael Bush is very good, and it's nothing to take anything away from him. They both just kind of reallocated assets, right? And it
Mm-hmm.
worked in both teams' favor. But at the end of the day, for me, Jackson Ferris and the development that the Dodgers will do with him is going to make this look like a Dodgers win, even though
So
Bush
let
will be a serviceable player.
so let me ask you this then: if this trade had been made between the Cubs and the Angels instead of the Cubs and the Dodgers, would your contention still be that Jackson Ferris is going to be the best get in the trade?
No, because the Angels will screw it up. Right? I mean, that's just being fair. They didn't
Yeah.
have time to screw up Otani. They didn't. They weren't bad enough to screw up Trout, but literally everything else they've touched has turned to trash.
Yeah. And so like that doesn't change anything, right? Because it wasn't the Angels, it was the Dodgers, but it does color how I see the trade a little bit. I disagree with you. I like the deal more for the Cubs, and I have more and more as time has gone past. I think Bush is the best player, best value in this deal. He's a major league ready, like really solid bat who's plug and play, gonna see time at various positions probably. I know you're a big fan of Ferris, and we know that the Dodgers do an amazing job with that type of prospect. Kind of raw, high upside, good athlete. Both he and Zaire Hope will be really interesting to monitor. And like you said, it fit both teams. But if I'm the Cubs, I mean, it fits Hoyer, I guess. He's going to take the more certain value now over the more volatile value later. So particularly with the strength of the Cubs farm system, right? Because I mean, they are absolutely loaded with additional impact prospects from kind of double A, triple A ish on down. And so that's why I really like the fit for them is they don't need to take a risk on upside. They have a ton of upside in their system up and down already. I like it a little bit more for the Cubs, I think, if I'm pressed. Surely the Cubs have a big move in them, right, Jeremy? And what should that be? What are you
So,
thinking?
so I feel like the Cubs, and there are other teams, but the Cubs are just staring at Scott Boras while Scott Boras stares back, right? And somebody's burning a cigar that just keeps burning. No one's smoking it. It's just smoking, and they're just looking at each other. And eventually, someone's going to blink, and we all know that it ain't going to be Scott Boras. He might reach an agreement with a couple teams, but eventually Scott Boras is going to get the money that he wants. And for me, it just seems like it should be Bellinger, right? It was successful for the Cubs last year. Uh, I think the Cubs are sitting there thinking, we have outfielders. We don't need to go, as long as Boras says we need to go. But I think we saw last year that Boras will get creative with Correa's contract, right?
Mm-hmm.
The numbers were big, but when you looked at it, you're like, hey, this isn't a terrible deal for the Twins,
Mm-hmm.
you know. And I think that's the type of thing that we can see because like there's Bellinger, there's Chapman, and then there's Montgomery and Snell, right? And those are all Boris guys. And to me, it seems like it's not going to be the pitcher side of things. I don't know that Chapman's the perfect fit, although he's not a terrible fit. And I think Boris is using that as kind of the play here, where you could use either of these guys. You don't want to miss on both of these guys, and we're going to see it because uh, I feel like it's got to happen. But Boris will wait as long as he feels like he needs to, and sometimes that's not great for his clients. But at the end of the day, the check's still cash, and that's what he's after.
Theo's going for Boris is going to get Matt Chapman to the Cubs. That's going to happen. That's his. That's his position. Yeah, man. I mean, I kind of agree. I agree with all of that. I think the Cubs need to be opportunistic now, right? And Matt Blood had a good piece on this at Northside Baseball. See, I'm promoting everybody's work today. Very cleverly entitled, like talking about the four Borismen, referring to Snell, Montgomery, Chapman, and Ballinger. I know Jed Hoyer's extremely cautious with big contract free agents. The Cubs farm system is loaded, but we're at opportunity time here, in my opinion, and particularly with the starting pitchers. So you've got Cade Horton and Ben Brown. Ben Brown carries a ton of reliever risk. Cade Horton is feeling like a slam dunk to make an impact sooner or later, but you can't guarantee that those guys are going to be front of the line starting a playoff game, starting pitchers. And if you have an opportunity to get one of those, whether that is Jordan Montgomery or Blake Snell, for a deal that is not what those guys were asking for at the beginning of the offseason, I think you got to pounce. I'm really interested to see if the Cubs land one of these guys because it really does feel like opportunity time. Like you said, Boris won't blink for sure. I agree, but they ain't going away forever. They're going to sign somewhere at some point. And I gotta believe that one of them's going to the Cubs. And if you can slot Snell or Montgomery in, you've got someone ahead of Imanaga who's starting a playoff game, and that puts the Cubs in a really strong position.
Yeah, I think any of those four would be perfect. But how many teams are out there? And I don't know the answer. I'm just saying aloud.
Yeah.
How many teams are still out there looking to spend 20 to 30 million dollars a year on a long-term deal?
Mm-hmm. Not the
Are
Twins.
there? I mean, are the Padres looking to spend? I don't think they are. They're
Nope.
big spenders. Are the Dodgers looking to spend still? I can't imagine
No.
they are.
The Yankees?
Are they? I mean, I feel like they would be more aggressive. Are the Red Sox in a position where they want to compete and spend? The Cardinals don't seem like the team that, they made a lot of moves early, but you think about the teams that are more of the teams that would spend the money. Are the White Sox going to jump in? They're garbage, right? But you just look at markets that maybe have money. Are the Braves just laying in the weeds and they're just going to suck up more good players because?
Let's hope not.
But you know what I mean? Like where
Yeah.
are these teams? I'm racking my brain, and I'm not coming up with teams. Is Moreno just going to be an idiot and just flush money away like he's done so well in the past that one of
Yeah.
these guys is going to be terrible for the Angels?
I feel
don't
like
know.
I've seen Snell to the Angels more than any other place at this point, right? I That's a great point though. I don't know. I don't have a good answer for that because, we focus so much on the issues the Twins have had with getting their TV situation together. And maybe we'll get a chance to talk about that when we talk about the Twins offseason. The recent Dave St. Peter interview with The Athletic about how that was resolved was interesting.
The other question that I often have is like, what's the 1 year deal worth taking and then going back into free agency, right?
Yeah.
Is if you're looking for 25 for over 8 or 25 over 6 or whatever you're looking for, what's that magic number to say, hey, we're going to do a 1 year pillow deal at 35 or 36 or 30? Like, what is it, and what does it work for some of these guys to make that deal happen? Because I feel like at some point, getting back on the market in a year might be the better idea if the money's not happening now. Again, Scott Boras figures things out. and I got dogs that are about to freak out. But
It's okay. We like the dogs. I mean, but in the case of Blake Snell, there's no 1-year deal that's gonna ameliorate your situation because you're never gonna do better than coming off the back of the NL Cy Young Award. Like, when is your performance gonna be better that you're gonna have more leverage other than the X factor of potentially 15 teams being or about half the league being more in the clear with their TV situation pending however the streaming stuff shakes out next year. Um, all right, let's move on unless you got any other final Cubs thoughts that you're burning to share.
I don't. Aside from, let's get to Wrigley this year.
Yeah. I've been to Wrigley though.
I never have been, so
Have
you
you
can
not?
say. But I guess me and Theo are gonna go then.
I want to come. I'm just keeping it real. Yeah, that would be awesome, dude. Let's do it. Um, okay. Last but not least, Twins offseason recap. Yo, I feel like I gotta preface this by saying the Cubs and the Twins, we can't even they don't even get a grade right now. They're both incomplete assignments, in my opinion. Um, Twins offseason recap in Josh Stallmont, Anthony DeSclafani, Justin Topa. On the prospect side, Gabriel Gonzalez, Darren Bowen. Also, Carlos Santana. 1 million relievers, including Jay Jackson and Steven Okert, who Theo, I believe, has been advocating for the Twins getting a hold of for a couple of years. So, way to go, Theo, reading the future. Out Jorge Polanco, Nick Gordon, Sonny Gray, Emilio Pagan, Kenta Maeda, Michael A. Taylor, question mark. We broke down the Twins' big trade of Polanco really extensively. But if you want to tie a bow on it as of now, you could say this, Jeremy. Jorge Polanco was traded for Gabriel Gonzalez, Justin Topa, Anthony DeSclafani, Darren Bowen, Carlos Santana, and Jay Jackson, because that is what their saved money was spent on. What are your thoughts about that in terms of value accrual for the Twins? How's that
Yeah,
work with you?
I really like the deal when it happened. I like Jorge Polanco. He was very
Yeah.
usable, serviceable. Loved that when he was in the lineup, the Twins were better. But the reality is that they had a logjam, and he was going to bring back value on a deal that was expiring, right? And so, for them to be able to get a top 100 prospect who
Mm-hmm.
has questions, um, a usable reliever in the trade, and then another usable reliever in free agency with that money. A guy that's going to figure in as their number 5, almost for sure, right? Um, Kind of an exciting pitching prospect, and an old man that's going to DH that gets on base 34% of the time and doesn't strike out a ton. Like, they took from every possible place in the candy aisle, they got all the candy, they put it in their bag, and they're like, the Jackson's a 1 year plus an option. Santana's a 1 year deal. Like, you can't hate 1 year deals anyway. And so they were just able to turn that one guy into, obviously, using a bunch of 40-man spots, which has to be considered, but to make their team deeper. And if that's what you get, I think that's a good deal. I said that at the beginning, like the added depth to pretty much every part of their roster, and by simply taking out a guy that was going to play out of position if he played anyway. So I liked it. I'm curious to see how these guys perform, right? Because trajectories go up and they go down, and we've seen injuries on this list, and we've seen guys that have pretty low floors. But at the end of the day, good trade for the Twins, and I don't think a bad trade for the Mariners either. You're on mute, my man.
Wow, that's the first time
There
that's
it
happened. Oh,
is.
I'm done. I'm done. We're doing so well. That is truly a old man on
Blooper.
Zoom moment.
Theo, did you flag that one? We're gonna have bloopers soon.
Outrageous. Truly embarrassing.
Oh,
Oh, this is gonna get put all over the internet. Can't wait. Okay. There is no Theo spent the timestamp in the chat. Great. There is no arguing the value the Twins got for Polanco. 100% agreed. So here's the follow up question I have for you, Jeremy. And Josiah Waldner also asked this as a listener question. I think it's interesting. Has the Twins' general approach to the offseason been a conscious effort to add value to the bullpen with a weaker rotation, right? So we've seen Maeda depart, essentially DeSclafani replaces him. We've seen Sonny Gray depart, essentially like Chris Paddock replaces him. I think we can fairly safely say that's not as certain of a value return. And I think it's fair to say the rotation isn't quite in as deep a spot as it was last preseason. So, do you think the Twins are compensating for the rotation with more by more like richly investing in the bullpen?
So yes, I think it's a conscious effort to add value to the bullpen. Does that also make games more winnable when your rotation is weaker? I think also yes, right?
Mm,
But does that prevent the team from strengthening their rotation now, next week, next month, the deadline? Not at all. And so if their plan A coming into the offseason was to, we're gonna lose Gray, we're gonna lose Maeda, we're gonna then add a top of the line starter. That's plan A. Maybe that's Corbin Burns. Maybe that's some of the guys we talked about before. Um, but then your plan B was, hey, let's just make our bullpen better. I feel like those don't have to work separately from each other, right?
hmm
If the plan B was, let's just get the Dylan Bundys and Chris Archers of the world, that I hate. And so I think, was plan C this, add a bunch of guys and make the bullpen great? I don't know, but I like it, right? And I've always been the guy that says use failed starters, don't invest, don't trade
hmm
for bullpen pieces. And we've seen what happened when the Twins use some of their assets to trade for a proven closer in Jorge Lopez, or Jorge Lopez. He's
hmm
trash, right? He was
It
absolutely
didn't work
garbage.
out great.
And so if you're gonna trade, some of your um, trade Polanco, get a reliever back. Use some of your money, sign Jay Jackson. Nick Gordon was not going to make the roster. Steve Okert replaces him. Um, use the waiver wire to add more pieces. I feel like I'm missing a couple of guys that are going to be in the bullpen too. Stalmont, like
hmm
there's upside there. And so none of this suggests that the Twins can't still add a starting pitcher, but
hmm
I think it better equips them if they don't. The really, really hard part for me is you can't have a 15-man bullpen, right? You're limited. 40-man spots are finite. Um, and so it's going to be a mess from a roster construction standpoint, um, and going to be difficult from a manipulation standpoint because the Cole Sands of the world that are going to run on the St. Paul shuttle, you're not going to have because you have established people. So I think the 40-man is always going to pose a problem with this strategy because
hmm
the fringe 40 guys are now established bullpen guys, and that to me could create some difficulties. But guys get hurt, you use 60-man DL spots. Those are problems that you probably deal with when you get to them.
For
That makes
sure. 100%. I hadn't really thought much about that. That's a really interesting point. I have long advocated for the Twins to just make a little more of an investment in their bullpen than they usually do, whether that is grab a guy in the like $4 to $6 million range, right? Like on a 1 year deal, just something more than the almost nothing that they usually do. I think they deserve a ton of credit for how they've constructed the bullpen this season, the amount of depth they have in the bullpen at St. Paul. Cody Funderburk's going to be starting in
Yep.
St. Paul, right? Like, where is Matt Cantorino going to start?
Big
Potentially
arm,
start,
love it.
potentially starting pitcher, potentially reliever. Not really sure. Like, there's a Jorge Alcala probably going to start in St. Paul. Like, you're talking about legit major league arms that have already have major league experience getting called up as a first wave when injuries happen and things go wrong, and that feels great. I think for the starting rotation, I feel the same way about it as I did after the Polanco trade, which is this. I feel great about this starting rotation going into the regular season. I would not feel great about the starting rotation going into a really difficult playoff series, um, pending developmental steps forward from the Joe Ryans and Bailey Obas of the world, right? Don't want to rule that out. But as you say, the door is still open to add a guy, add a starter. And it seems like the prices that folks are asking at the moment for starting pitching are wild. So the Twins don't want to pay him. I get it.
What is what's Jordan Montgomery going to sign for? Because when the season was just wrapping up and he was being awesome,
Mm-hmm.
I was like, God, Jordan Montgomery in a Twins uniform would be a whole lot of fun. Theos is
Mm-hmm.
100 million or more.
Way,
At
I think
this
way
point,
more.
is it still going to be that much as we approach the middle to the end of February? Right? To me, that's a huge question. I'm not a Snell guy.
I
I
don't like
wouldn't
Snell either.
consider throwing any of the money at any of those other three. Chapman would be fun, but that's not going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Like to me, Jordan Montgomery would be it would fill in a lot of the blanks that we have about this rotation, right?
Yep.
Um, what's he costing a 1 year deal? What's he costing a 2 year deal? What kind of incentives could you possibly put in a deal? Things like that to me, because the talk of the cheap poll ads, which has always been a thing, right? It's a running joke on Twitter. What have the Twins done recently that suggests that they're cheap, aside from never going into the tax on their draft pool?
That is
Aside from
weird.
that, what have they
That
done
is weird.
that suggests that they're cheap? They gave Joe Mauer all sorts of money, right? They
Mm-hmm.
gave Byron Buxton a pretty sizable chunk of money for being hurt. They gave Correa a lot of money on what was a 1 year deal and now a long term deal. Like they've spent money and they've spent prospects. Like they've done the things that you would always want them to do. There's just that stigma that they weren't going to do it, but they have, and people are still
Well,
upset.
let me tell you, Jeremy, whatever progress they have made, and I do agree with you in general, like the Pohlads are far from the work. They're just, they're owners. They're average
Right.
owners. They're fine. Whatever progress they've made has been the perception of that has been undone by the TV deal shenanigans and just like general lack of clarity, statements about blackouts going away and now they're re-signing with Bally. We don't know what the money is going to be. We are seeing at the moment a 30 million-ish dollar drop in payroll. I think that's hard to stomach for people after last season, no matter what the TV picture is. And the reports are like 15% less of last year, which I think is somewhere in the like 8 to 12 million range in terms of a drop. So I agree with you 100%. And I agree 1000% that Jordan Montgomery is the best fit and would be great for the Twins. I think he's looking for like 150 million. Which leads me to my last Twins related question before we finish with some listener questions, Jeremy, for you is what is the Twins' final move? Assuming there's only one more, maybe they'll surprise us. What else are they doing if you had to pick it and throw some names out there if you're feeling bold, man?
If I had to guess, I feel like the one thing that hasn't been addressed, aside from starting pitching, high end starting pitching, right,
Mm-hmm.
is another right-handed outfield bat.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we've talked about those names. I think at some point a Michael A. Taylor reunion has to be considered a likelihood, right? Um, I don't know where that comes in, but I could see that being a deal because I think he fit in well with the team. I think he did everything the team asked. It would provide great Byron Buxton insurance, and it would allow Buxton to play some DH and Santana to play first.
Yeah.
And so I think that really makes the most sense. And I still think they'd be open to adding pitching too. Like everything, and maybe it's because Derek Felvey words things better, and Thad Levine words things better than Terry Ryan did, right? It always felt like Terry Ryan was spending every single dollar that he was allowed to spend, and there was not going to be more money spent. But was that just how he played it off? Because Derek Felvey and Thad Levine, to a lesser extent, have always been like, we went to ownership and they approved spending more money,
Hmm.
and then they do. And so I could see them, and maybe it's not Jordan Montgomery, and I don't even know who it might be at this point, but spending a little bit of money that makes us all say, where did that come from? Even though we know where it came from because they've been putting it in the coffers for the last 55 years. Uh, and they have it. And so Michael A. Taylor, I feel like makes the most sense if they decided to go with a different, maybe power hitting right-handed bat. I know we've discussed those names too, but right-handed outfield bat, and then maybe a starting pitcher depending on who slips through the cracks.
Like it. I'm in agreement, man. Yeah. Someone like Taylor, Pham, Duval, one of those guys feels pretty likely. A little bit surprised it hasn't already happened, honestly, with spring getting up and running. Um, Duval Theo says Duval since he complete still plays center field. All right. We're we recap 3 off seasons in 45 minutes, man. That's not bad. Let's finish up with a couple of listener questions, Jeremy. You want to take this first one?
Is this a new one? Did I not see this earlier?
No, I moved it up because I want to do this one first and then do the other one last.
Okay. So Josiah Wallner says, how would you feel about Harold Ramirez from the Rays as the right-handed hitting outfield they acquire? Um, I mean, for me, it's are you going to spend prospect capital versus signing guys for cheap on the market, right? I think Ramirez is probably a little bit better than the guys we talked about, right? But what's the cost?
Mm-hmm.
The Rays are going to find that pitcher that they're going to turn into the next big thing, and I just don't want to do business with them. They're going to give me another Delman Young. I don't like that. Um, I'm content waiting out the free agent market for that right-handed hitting outfielder. But yeah, Ramirez would be fine. I know that that's someone that we talked about, in the fall. But I don't see that happening. If it happened, fine. But um, I'd stick to the free agent market at this point.
I would too, given the timing. If we had asked this question a month ago, I would not have been opposed at all to acquiring that right-handed outfield bat by trade and getting a higher caliber of player with some team control, knowing that Kepler's out of contract at the end of this season, right? And so you potentially have an outfield future hole to fill. But yeah, I think I agree with you. Uh, it's most likely going to be a 1 year free agent deal in the $6 to $9 million range with something like
But,
that.
and I will always say there's no such thing as a bad 1 year contract.
Fair. All right. Let me ask you this question. See, okay, eternal tension when Greg Masterson tweets anything, which is, do you give him the attention he so desperately desires? And read his question, but unfortunately, it's a good question, so we are going to read it. So this is what it feels like to be on mean tweets, Jeremy. He says, as dirty, grubby prospect hoarders, are you pleased that the Twins seem to have finished the offseason without trading away prospects? What's your take on this, man? Because really, they've really moved nobody this offseason from their farm system. And I think if someone had offered you that as a bet before the beginning of the offseason, you would have said absolutely no chance the
Right.
Twins don't at least make like a minor deal moving a prospect to another team.
Right. I was way more open this offseason to moving prospects than I ever have been before.
Hmm.
Uh, and I think that has a lot to do with watching last year's team win some playoff games, getting to a position where it's like, could this team compete for a World Series? And the answer was absolutely they could.
Hmm.
Casey Stern always said prospects are cool. parades are cooler.
Yeah.
And I thought that the parade felt close ish. Um, and now the pitching's taken a step back, but they still have the ammunition to make the move. If you believe in the Twins player development, and I do, and I think you do too.
Hmm.
Uh, Going into the season with everybody from the off season, you develop those players, and their value is going to go up, and their value is going to go down, one or the other, right? It's not typically going to stay the same. And I think because the Twins are so good at developing talent, at least in the recent past, they're going to have more ammunition to make a move. And so, as dirty, grubby prospect hoarders, am I pleased? Not necessarily pleased. I've said movie rod, trade Brooksley if the price is right, um, but there just obviously wasn't those opportunities, and
Hmm.
maybe they present themselves in the spring. The Twins have a history of making deals with Taylor Rogers. What that was like opening day eve,
Hmm.
right? So I think the chances that it still happens are non-zero. Um, but I I like having the ability to make moves. And if you trade all your guys, then you can't make the move. So um, sure, I'll say that I'm pleased, even though that I was totally willing to move those guys and still am. I like
Yeah.
prospects though.
That's all fair, man, for sure. And one thing that I think is like a little bit underrated about this offseason is the Twins have added significant value to their farm system, right? Like Gabriel Gonzalez is a consensus top 125 prospect, I think we can call him. Like he makes the back end on some lists, not on others. Um, he's another interesting piece. Kylie McDaniel, who I know that you are a fan of his work and his draft coverage, right? I like his approach to ranking farm systems. He does it by dollar value. And I should have this to him, but I don't. But the Twins have typically been floating around in like the mid teens, like the 15 to 20 range on most um, kind of industry farm rankings from the end of last season to the beginning of this. But McDaniel, I think, had them in the top 10. And I think that's a testament both to like adding like Gonzalez, who's obviously he thinks of as at least roughly a top 100 guy, but also their internal development of guys that maybe is a little more value in than other folks think. And so my other um, my other thing that I've enjoyed a ton this offseason and just getting through a quarter century of these podcasts with you almost, right, is being able to dig into all these guys and really looking forward to actually tracking them and their performance over the course of the season. So, yes, I'm going to continue to hoard prospects until it's necessary, but I would answer that question differently if the Twins don't do anything much to improve the team at the trade deadline, like last season's trade deadline, which was super disappointing.
Right.
Jeremy, anything else on the Twins or Cubs or Brewers before we call it a day here?
I don't think so. I mean, the news may start to come, but at this point, right, we're seeing in our timelines, we're seeing video of people throwing baseballs. And
Grainy
that's fun.
videos
Yep.
through chain
That's
link
fun.
fences.
Yep.
Yeah. Seeing videos of Wanderon blowing the doors off people. Really cannot wait for the games to start. Okay, so just in closing here, real quick, just to preview what's coming up, we are going to continue to monitor the news. Any big trades, we will try our hardest to do an emergency pod on because folks enjoyed that one. We have top 20 prospect lists coming up. We're going to start with the Brewers tentatively next week. And me and Jeremy are going to do like a dueling top 20 prospects where we're going to make some arguments about who's where. We'll cover Brewers and Twins and Cubs, and cover news and notes and all of the things that spring training brings for all of these ball clubs. As always, appreciate folks supporting the show. Remember and email us at destinationtheshow@gmail.com if you are residing in Norway and enjoy the show. We especially want to hear from you. And we'll catch you guys next week. Take it easy.